Hey everybody, it's Kira from Toronto here. Today you can see that I have two amazing and wonderful guests. These are Matt and Nick, and they practice behavioral science experimentation techniques. And they help companies and especially marketing people to design their marketing campaigns and digital tests better. Hi Matt, hi Nick. So glad
Hi,
to see you
Kira.
here.
Hi, Kira. Great to be here. Thanks for the
Yeah.
invite.
Awesome. So let's start from the very simple question. Just explain what you do. So let's start with you, Matt.
My name is Matt Wright. I'm the Director of Behavioral Science at Widerfunnel, and I'll do a little bit of an intro. So Widerfunnel is a marketing agency, a digital marketing agency based in Vancouver. We work mainly with companies in North America, but some around the world. And what we are best at is we run experimentation programs. And so I am very, very lucky that I get to lead and work very closely with Nick on the behavioral science component of this and how people apply behavioral science through their experimentation programs. And in your question of how I got here, I think that's a very, very long story. Lots of, I think, interesting opportunities, good little breaks. I had a chance to study design as like a master's student in the UK. Had a chance to work with some very large like enterprise companies after that, and then found Widerfunnel a little bit by accident that they were starting to build out a behavioral science practice. And then I think Nick was the one I first like started working with on that, like way back when, which is about like 4 years now. So really crazy, and joined it at a great time where then just really expanded and we started taking on enterprise clients all across the United States. So it's been a really interesting journey, but more than anything, I think it was just like good breaks, right timing, type of thing.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. You're very lucky. And then, Nick, what is your role in the company then? And how did you get there before
Sure.
Matt?
Yeah, so my name is Nick So. I'm the VP of Client Services at Widerfunnel. So I oversee the team of strategists, researchers, program managers, designers, and developers, basically the team that's client-facing and actually produces the work for our clients. And so I came to Widerfunnel really also kind of by chance and by accident, really. When I think 5.5 years ago, when I came to Widerfunnel, I had no idea that there were agencies who did this. I thought they were just kind of some kind of digital marketing SEO company, but I came into it as a program coordinator, and then really learned and really fell in love with what the company does and the whole A/B testing aspect of it. And I've been just kind of fortunate to ride along with the growth, and I'm kind of where I am today based off of past experiences and so on.
Yeah, and what's your background education? Matt is a designer, and you?
Mine was so I had a Bachelor of Business in Marketing specifically, so more so general marketing that I went to school for.
Oh, you're one of the few in the field. So, guys, I will ask the same question, both of you, because one is on the strategy side and the other one is on the implementation side. So, our community consists of North American marketers, which is amazing and a great fit for this conversation. A lot of us know to run A/B testing. We have huge MarTech stack. So can you explain why we need to be looking at behavioral economics versus just A, B, C, D, E testing as we're used to? Matt, let's start with you from strategic point of view.
I got chosen to go first, so the pressure's on. Yeah, I would say so. I think when we're running experiments or applying behavioral science, definitely when you look at like instrumentation or the tools that you use, like super important. Like if you can't measure stuff, hard to really like actually measure behaviors and then kind of evaluate what works best. But I think what a lot of people actually get stuck with is much more on the side of, well, how do I actually do this and apply this in like a rigorous way that's going to drive results? And so both from like Widerfunnel's perspective, I think we bring a lot of like framework thinking and rigor to that, but then also take a lot of like the theory from like behavioral science and bring it into like a very practical element, and then put it into practice. Everything's a bit nuanced, like everything works well in like a classroom or like a university study, but we've got the opportunity here to actually run experiments in the real world for a very like contextual, nuanced thing for each company. And so I think we do like an amazing job. Well, it's also incredible to work in, where we bring a lot of those concepts out and then can apply them in a very like rigorous, more framework world where it's like really real world science, but in like an applied manner. And so We kind of talk a lot about like tools are great, but like there's also like a professional aspect. Like you can't just buy a race car and then put a normal driver in it. Like you do have to have kind of training and work that up. And I think in our role, we both get to like work on like driving those cars as an analogy, but we also like train people and enable people to drive the cars themselves. And so we get to play like, it's really fun to play both those roles. And over time, we kind of mature and we get to do more and more advanced things.
That's cool. And so I think Nick is the one who actually coaches those drivers and sits in the driver's seat. So Nick, can you explain then how you do that? What are your steps? Do you have the helmet? Do you have the rules, the instructions? Tell me more about that.
I think for us, the big thing is, as Matt mentioned, the framework thinking aspect of it. It allows people to operate within this kind of setup process and transfer what they have in their heads into something that's going to be actionable. So a lot of times, people have a general understanding of how customers behave, especially if they're within like design with regards to like digital experiences or like consumer behavior. If we talk about marketing, they have all these this knowledge and experience. However, these frameworks really allow us to make those ideas into something actionable. And so like, through cross training and experience through working with different clients and shadowing different team members, our team really leverages these frameworks in order to really effectively scale up that that ability in order to transfer these loose insights into something that's really actionable. So I think that's kind of where our kind of secret sauce is really. And then the idea of like combining A/B testing with behavioral economics and behavioral science is really the A/B testing side of things really gives a good insight as to what something happened. You can see people clicked on this thing or what they did, but then it really doesn't really answer the question of why they did that. And so that's where the research and behavioral economics comes in, because it tells you why they did something. And then that makes it so much more powerful to be able to take the testing insights from A/B testing and maybe take it to branding, marketing campaigns, or like sales techniques. So we're really about not just simply seeing what works on the website, but really validating core insights and learnings that can be applied in other areas.
Wow, you just opened a Pandora box. I am going to torture you with details about that.
Right.
Yeah, so what you're saying is when we just do A/B testing, we know what happened, we can't explain why. And oftentimes I think we have a challenge of what to test, what is A and what is B, and what the measurable outcome is. So Matt, can you explain how you help companies to define what to test at all? What's the process? How you discover that?
This is a massive question, but I'll do my best to kind of break it down and kind of talk about it. I think there are like a couple of different approaches that we take. So I think we do pull on lots of different types of data that we kind of ingest in. And when we talk about like our process as like a company, we really talk about having like two mindsets. One is very like an exploratory mindset where we're going out and uncovering like either barriers or opportunities of things to test. And so at a core level, like foundational framework, we want to look at like inputs from more qualitative forms of research. And these can be very like active, like we're going out and we're talking to people, we're doing user tests, we're identifying that. It can be more passive when we're looking at analytics or kind of like very basic, like say like polls or kind of like heat mapping or eye tracking on a website. And then there's all these other aspects we bring in from like past tests that we've run. A lot of it's just like an expert opinion where we'll look at it from the perspective of what's out there. Huge like number crunching here where there's a big like analytics component of the exercise. There's a lot of bringing in these fields of theory from behavioral science and like particularly like the fields like persuasion and like Cialdini's principles. I think that like have a core component of it. And then there's just like the context of like the business itself. So really diving in terms of like, what are the goals? There is like a strategy component. You shouldn't just test for, we just drive conversion. We really connect it back to like, where do we want to go as an organization and what kind of experience do we want our customers to have? And we really look at that from a lens of like, how do we break that down, turn those into concepts so that we can actually like kind of define and make them testable, but then move into a second stage where now we've got a bunch of ideas and ideas are cheap. So we've got to prioritize those, break them down, and then actually try to run them in a set of like sequences. And probably I could talk about this for an hour, but there's a lot of components that go into how do we identify opportunities, but then just as much turn them into something we can test and learn from. And that learning is important. We're not just going out to like find a winner. We also want to learn every time. And then also find a way to prioritize like the sequence we're going to run them, where they're going to run, And this is both like a very like objective thing where we can pull numbers in and make it somewhat scientific, but there's a lot of subjectivity to it, which is from like expertise. There's also politics and like organizations. Like we have to like work through that. And so this is both very much like a number problem, but also like a human problem of how do we like win in terms of like, how do we influence people, get stuff running, show progress, all of that. And so I think that's like what makes the job so interesting is it's never like this is exactly what you do, but there are like rules and of thumbs that we create and like guiding principles that can be really effective. And what they do over time is really drive the needle and move the needle forward, I should say, not drive the needle.
Yeah, it sounds like alchemistry to me, honestly.
I think it is very much like a science-based like approach to this. It's just in an applied world. And both on that side though, where we also flip is we're not doing research in the format of like peer review or whatever. Like at the end of the day, we have limited time, money, and energy. And like we're also getting to the point we want to make decisions, we want to make progress, and we want to drive action. So we kind of sit in that sweet spot between the two.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Nick, I think you are well positioned to help me to break it down into even more specific steps. So let's say there is a client, it doesn't really matter in which space. So you would come to the client, you would work with whom internally to define what the business objectives are. And then what happens next? Who does the research through those sources that Matt mentioned? How long does it take? And then how you actually limit that down to very specific deliverables and testing hypothesis, I think it's called.
Yeah, that's a lot of questions to take in. But I think first of all, in terms of the teams that we work with, it varies quite a bit from, the website managers to the VPs of marketing, depending on what business question or problems they want to achieve or address, whether it's understanding how customers receive or perceive a brand compared to what they actually need. That's something at a higher level versus something more tactical, like just improving conversion rates on a website, helping designers guide how they should be designing delightful experiences. So, our process and our frameworks really apply to a lot of different problems, and in that case, a lot of different types of stakeholders within an organization. But ultimately, it's really focused. Our champions are really keen on being very customer centric and understanding, what customers really want to do and creating those experiences that will appeal to the customer and listening to them rather than trying to tell their customers what they should be thinking and what they should be doing is kind of the key. Our strongest champions at least approach these problems from. And then in terms of working with us, we meet with our clients on a weekly basis, and we find ourselves, we try to be very integrated with their teams. A lot of the reasons why our clients really love us is that it almost feels like an extension of their team because we work so closely with them, and we also try to understand what they go through day to day so thoroughly to understand their goals and their high level objectives, so that we are trying to address the core problems and not, something that's, smaller scale really. And so we meet on a weekly basis. We essentially review all the insights and results we gain from both the quantitative A/B testing as well as the qualitative testing and research that we have. We discuss these insights, seeing what areas are applicable for the clients or what other questions or insight that comes out from that discussion to propose and come up with follow-up tests or qualitative research to kind of validate those learnings. So it's just kind of ongoing basis of learning, validating, with the intent being the primary goal that their clients want to achieve for their business. Again, very tactical, from increasing web performance to more defined strategic goals, like how to best position a brand or a new service that's being developed. So it's just really based on the lens we want to look at. That's going to be most relevant and effective for our champions.
Yeah, does it often happen that different stakeholders name different challenges and you have to guide them based on some limitations or their budget, what to prioritize? Who is better positioned to answer this question? Not even sure. Maybe you have different answers as well.
Well, maybe I'll take a stab and maybe just build a little bit off of what Nick said. And then I think he can jump in, I think, on the even more on like the execution side of it. I think on the prioritization, there's lots of different stakeholders that exist. But I also think that like what we find when we work with different companies is like no two company is the same. And like the program or what we're trying to do is like a little bit different. And there are essentially constraints, especially if we're trying to apply this type of approach, that are different by each like company. And so just as much like our job is to work with people to find out what is that uniqueness and those unique constraints that exist for them. And then we work very much on like, okay, how do we work in that system of constraint that they have, but also work really closely on like, how do we remove some of those constraints? And that's a big part of like, from a program perspective that we're doing is like, what are the bottlenecks? How do we mature you to the next level? And then over time, those constraints are going to change. We're going to have like change. They're going to have like more stakeholders involved, all of that. And so all of those lenses and the way we think about the program, what we're trying to do, like will shift and mature. And so that's also important too, that it doesn't stay stagnant over time. It is changing. And just as much, that's where we're working with them like very closely on how do we prioritize and where are the battles that we win and how do we like build momentum? Because it really is a game of momentum. And when we keep doing this over and over again, we're going to get results. And then we want to keep compounding that as much as possible.
Yeah, so it's not only behavioral economics, it's behavioral stakeholder management and whatnot.
Totally, yeah.
Oh, that's great insight. And Nick, then a practical question to you. What is the average length of a project when you come and you didn't design it yet, and then you say, hey, from this point, I can hand it off back to the organization?
Yeah, well, a lot of our clients, most of our clients, we have it on a retainer basis. So we kind of gradually, continually be able to support them with whatever problems they encounter at any different quarter, at any given point. And I think that's really what makes it even more effective, because we're able to go through that journey through time of what they're encountering and really be alongside with them as they encounter these challenges or these opportunities. On the client side, it's not just like a one and done project where we just kind of pass it off and say like, here, now you deal with it, but rather we really try to have a strong partnership to be able to not only address the current problems, but help them discover what those opportunities, the next challenges, the next things to really tackle, and help them design research and validation programs to address those new opportunities. So there really isn't a kind of set time. How we like to work with it is really just alongside with our clients and really closely together, so we are able to give a pulse on what's going on.
Yeah, that's the best way. I think you're not even a partner, you are like the extension, as you said, and not a vendor for sure. And then I always ask this challenging question: how do you measure success? Maybe I can start with Matt again on the higher level, because you see a lot of clients, you're responsible for strategic approach. So what are 1 to 5 main KPIs, if there are some?
Yeah, well, I think it again really ties back to like the unique context of who we're working with, the stakeholders and like the company. But definitely success is measured that like we want to set like an objective that we want to create. So in some cases that could be, if I think of like a subscription product, like we just want to add like more subscriptions. So we want to sign people up. But just as much with that same type of kind of stakeholder that we're working with, it could be that we want to keep as many people in a subscription as possible. And so I think as much we try to like really isolate as like, what is the primary thing that we want to do? And so part of, I think, again, like when me and Nick work with teams, and this has evolved over time, like it's like, what are the goals that we're trying to like connect? Like, is there kind of thing? And we want to identify metrics. And then kind of what Nick's alluding to is then we're working with them on like a cadence of like, how can we run tests and experiments over a period of time? And actually our goal is that like, we want to balance like both the quality of the experiments we're doing and like metrics that come out of it of like, okay, how much are we changing these key metrics that exist to us, but also the learnings that we're creating. So it's okay sometimes that we maybe don't move the metric, but as long as we're still learning, that gives us the next test or that insight that we can like leverage in the future. I think that's really great. But then like over time, we're also trying to increase the speed or like the amount of experiments that we can run. And so I think that's where we talk about the maturation of this is it's all going to scale. And many of the companies we work with, you're coming in at a maturity level. We help you identify what your potential is. And at a certain point, maybe people have a lot of like potential to run experiments, but just because of other constraints, they can't like actually reach that. And so we're relieving that bottlenecks. But also, if we work with clients like long enough, they actually start growing. They have more traffic. They open up new products, new areas that we test on. And so that also grows as well in terms of the breadth of it. And so I think it's this real balance. But essentially, we're always focused on, okay, how is this measurable? How do we communicate this to these other stakeholders that it's like they have goals on in terms of like What's the revenue here? What's the cost? How does this connect to like our profit? How does it connect even to just like efficiencies in terms of like how we work? And so we're constantly communicating that with them, and we set that always at like typically like a quarterly or like an annual cadence, and always reviewed. But it's also not stagnant. Like we're constantly saying, is this the right thing to measure? Should it change? If we learned something else we didn't know before, it's constantly going back to the drawing board. And I think that's a key thing. You always got to question yourself. Like it's like maybe that was the right thing to measure us by at this point in time, but down the road it may not be. And so it's constantly this balance of like we have primary metrics, we have secondary metrics, and that's I think what makes it so fun is it's not clear cut. It's like there's an analysis component here, there is an interpretation, and we work really hard on like an individual experiment level, but then how does it connect to the bigger program goals?
No, that's
cool.
Fair,
Nick?
So that's cool because it's both agile and flexible, because everything is changing these days and people cannot necessarily prioritize well, or even say that the priorities will not change, because they will. And on the other hand, that makes marketing more relevant to the business goals, which is amazing. And then I'll pivot to Nick. Can you name your best achievement, numbers wise, results wise, that you've had throughout your career with Widerfunnel?
There was a client where they provide, so they produce printers, and they have a service where you can subscribe to get ink on a regular basis. And so we were brought in to help optimize their onboarding flow of when they buy the printer and they're setting it up to have them sign up for this service. And so I think that was one of the biggest opportunities that I've had, and also had the biggest result as well, because a lot of times we brought in really, instead of very tactical UI and UX changes, that was kind of one of the areas where I saw the value of behavioral economics and understanding the behavior side of things by leveraging things like choice architecture to be able to help them determine which plan or which subscription works best for them, and kind of just basically reframing the different options of that plan of the subscription in that flow, resulted in almost more than doubling the enrollments just from that one change. And so that was a pretty big aha moment for me to success. And it was also, to the point that Matt made about helping validate larger questions. It was for a pilot program that they wanted to scale up, and they were trying to find what the best way to present this program was. And so not only were we able to help them just improve the enrollments in that funnel, but then also provided insight and guidance into how they were going to scale that across, more the larger demographics or different countries. So it was quite rewarding and quite a big eye-opening experience of the power of, these, the behavioral economic side of things.
Oh, that's even cooler. Taking into account, I thought we're living in the subscription economy, but now with the pandemic, I think it's unsubscription economy. So it will be interesting to see how they're all further on.
Yeah, I have one. I think this one actually is quite an easy question for me to answer. It's definitely one of my favorite moments working here. Was when I was in graduate school. I worked a lot with like an initiative called like the circular economy, which at the time I thought was very fascinating, focused on this whole kind of regenerative economy with bringing in principles of sustainability. But the tension always there is like, how does that connect to like business? And we actually had a client that was decided to do something very, very basic. They added the idea of like an offset for sustainability, essentially, to their option that people could pay more for. And the fascinating thing about that was it actually drove like way more people to like interact with this company and like want to buy from it. And I always thought that was like the most fascinating thing about like how that can actually be used in this very like this perception of how someone perceives this is very, very different. And even again, it was like one of those great things that just took us down like a very different path of what does that look like? How does that apply to the company? Where can this go? And like even contribute to this much bigger goal than just the price of like an item itself.
And did you figure out why that was?
We don't know like exactly. I think we have like our hunches. What was I think like more exciting about that was like that revealed like, okay, like this is great that we can work in this type of like adding sustainability to this, and it's not like harming the product in any way. But then also like, how do we communicate that? Was that the best way to do it? Like the first time, or we looked a lot on like refinement, like where does that go? Like there were a ton of like things around like execution for that then that come up. And I can't share too much about this because we still work on this like super actively today. And I think that was like a huge aha that someone came up with just a very clever, interesting idea and a way to test something, get a very like humbling result, and then like it gets like a whole bunch of different perspective all of a sudden in a company, and they're totally changing the way they are thinking about like even that type of an initiative.
That's amazing. I love the sustainability topic. I believe it's not explored enough. And that's great. You mentioned that example. Nick, did you have another one?
Yeah, for sure. I think one in terms of outside of wider funnel, maybe not so much an aha moment, but like almost a insight into behavioral economics. Even before this was back in university, I did a whole kind of final thesis report during my university days about why the iPod became so popular. And my kind of hypothesis was that they were the first ones to introduce the white headphone wires. Before the iPod, there was no such thing; they were all black. But because they just that one small change in the color of the wire, now that if you see somebody with an iPod in on the train or in the streets, you immediately associate that with the iPod, and you can see that it's way more popular than other competitive MP3 players back in the day.
Wow.
And so for my kind of thesis was that if that was the color of the headphone wires was the sole reason why people saw the iPod and it became such a popular product. So I think even before joining Widerfunnel, I was always super into that whole consumer behavioral aspect of things.
Yeah, you ought to be here.
Yeah, and no, unfortunately, at that time, I couldn't find a way to validate whether that's true or not. But I think in terms of kind of currently with Widerfunnel and what's validated, I think one of the cool recent moments was we work with a company that provides grooming products, to consumers, and through the research we were evaluating this. Choose your product wizard type thing to see what products would suit them. And so through the research, we had a person of color doing the research, and they realized that none of the options for hair product really resonated with them because it didn't reflect people of color's hairstyles. And I think just with it provided a huge aha moment and realization for the team, and also was very relevant to the state of what's been going on in conversation in the society. So I think that was a really cool thing that we learned just from these interviews, and definitely unexpected and new learning that we got.
Yeah, I also love the fact that you work with so many different companies from any industry and probably can cross-reference some hypotheses or ideas from one to the other. Then one question that I cannot help asking. So there is traditional research, desktop research and primary research. How do you compete, or how do you work with those agencies together?
I would say like I think it's a bit of a combination that like we're not trying to like work against them. I think it's very much in like combination. But again, I think it comes back just down to like the practical element of it. I think there's a lot you can get from research in terms of like ideas and concepts. And even I think there's some where like if you particularly take like attitudes that might come through like surveys or whatnot, that can be valuable. But there's the whole Henry Ford thing. It's like if you ask people what they want, they won't really kind of come up with like that ideal thing. So I think we get to tie this really back down to very much behavioral. What's like action? What are people actually doing? And then also assign like probabilities and like outcomes to it. And so it's just a very different practice where we're building essentially how I like to think about it on the work that they're doing, but it's really kind of testing some of that, and they need to work together. They're not like one versus the other. This is, I think, just like a next step on terms of like how you build it. And so I think more and more that's becoming a common practice out there, or at least I hope it is. But I think it's the next step where if you come up with a hunch from research, you come up with like a theory, that's great. You then have to still transition that from design into practice and make sure it works, and you solve for like a perception gap that maybe the actual end user is going to have. And that's where I think testing comes into play. And even our research is more than focusing on that. It's like that end experience and how someone actually goes through that and then solving for some of those constraints.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love your answer. Yeah, Nick, what did you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think definitely we definitely like to work alongside research teams. And as I mentioned before, it's the frameworks and how we do things of translating those insights into actionable, testable ideas that can be implemented, in a digital experience or in a marketing campaign or in like sales activities is something that, we supplement, those different teams for research. But then we also feel that, we kind of sit between these different services of research, UX design, consultancies, where we are able to provide, the next step to supplement those things. Where UX research, we're able to help validate whether those designs actually are efficient or not. And consultancies, where we're able to also provide guidance on what to do and how to scale their programs, but also help them alongside actually execute on them as well. So we're very complementary to all these different services, and just kind of filling in the gaps where to make sure that the outputs from those things can be actioned and like tested and actually are effective in providing returns.
I'm so happy I asked you, closed the gap for me. Thank you so much. And I would ask the last question that is related to the current situation. So your tests, are they mainly digital, or you tied it together with the offline, be it events or maybe some physical presence of some assets like billboards and stuff like that? And what did the pandemic change?
I think from my perspective, like digital is probably the biggest opportunities for validation testing, just because of the sample and the ability to track.
However, because of the scale?
Yeah, exactly.
Scale and tracking.
But we've definitely helped clients, design experiments on non-digital areas as well. And just kind of figuring out what the metrics are, what the effective sample sizes are, what the impact we need to see are. And so, we feel that validation methods aren't strictly relegated to digital, but rather any opportunity, any area we can get some sort of evidence and comparison. We try to do that as much as possible within the context and constraints that are available. I'm sure Matt can speak to more of that as well.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it on the head. I think we definitely are very much like digital first, and I think that comes down to just like measurement and like attribution. Like we're very fortunate in that type of medium to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I think though, as you kind of talk about it, so like when we think about like COVID and what it's done is it's like a massive behavioral change has like occurred, and so we talk a lot with different types of groups, and being lucky to work across a lot of them. For some people, that's been unfortunately like very, very difficult. And for some, it's been really, really good. And so I think there's different strategies exist across both of them. And so it's kind of like big changes are happening really, really rapidly. And so I think what that is leading to is there's different types of experiments that are being applied more broadly now. So like Nick's saying, there are things that exist. But I think the important thing to do is say like, well, there are new assumptions that have to be made. There's different type of measurements. There's different type of confidence levels. And so again, I think that's where it gets into like really nitty gritty and how you interpret those results, think about them, and kind of take that forward. And so there's a lot of different experiment types, and there's no one way to do it. If anyone says there is, I think that's a bit like misleading. And so we kind of then have to start balancing it, and we are doing it with some clients. I think it's going to like expand like more and more. But there's also the balance there too of like, you got to make sure that it's not like a randomized controlled trial is not the same as like we went out and did a pre-post test experiment with a billboard or something in like the field. So those trade-offs exist. It's good to test things, like we really believe in it, but just as much, it's really important to do like a thorough results analysis and make sure you're not just kind of doing a bunch of testing without any real measurable attribution.
Yeah, especially now when the budgets are shrinking, I would say. I think the more targeted you are, the more nailed you are on your final goal and ultimate result is the better. So I have the last question to you guys, because I think we covered a lot, and for me, it's a lot to digest as well. So from your experience and from what has been happening lately, which companies should be thinking of using behavioral economics more these days? Matt?
I don't know if it's like which companies should be thinking about it more. I think it's an example that there's different, again, already maturity levels of people who are doing this and not. I think this is like a very like strategic approach that numerous companies can take, and it's not just limited to like a very privileged few in any way. And I think part of like the blessing of that is like most of this work has been done in universities, if you look back on the last like 40 years, and it's in university labs or whatnot, but the tools now exist to do this at scale in the real world for like your unique like context. And I think that it's not limited to one size fits all at all. And just as much, I would say the people that are thriving right now, sure, like you can pour more fuel on the fire. And I think it's more like securing and making that like a sticky, kind of very connected experience to like your customers. And then if you have been like big changes, I think it's just as much like understanding those changes, coming up with new strategies. So many industries are very like traditional, like in person, like I think are going through like radical shifts right now in how they interact. And I think just behavioral economics and behavioral science, like more broadly, is a great way to help like think through that and both build an understanding, but then also design for it and then really prove out that that works.
That's cool. Nick, what do you think? Because from what Matt said is like, if you don't know what to do, how to pivot, you have a challenge, you are stuck. Maybe this is something you should be looking at.
Yeah, I think definitely, I think one area for kind of the more tactical is the people who are currently just doing A/B testing and having their experimentation programs. I think integrating this approach of understanding behavioral economics, or when they run out of ideas of what to hypothesize or what to test, definitely this is one way to make sure that the new ideas that are coming out provide more inspiration for these kind of more innovative ideas, because you're having greater focus on the customer rather than kind of what you have currently in front of you. I think definitely if you're already mature enough to run testing programs, to integrate this perspective would be hugely beneficial to that. I think in a more general sense, whenever you are running into new problems or challenges, to again take that customer-centric approach and start with the customer first before developing the solution. I think a lot of times, especially in new industries where they have these traditional incumbents in the organization, but they're being threatened by these disruptors. A lot of times the disruptors, they have the same level of product or service that, you can't really, they're already table stakes. It's a matter of how you're able to cater and position those services in line with the customers that really set people apart, set companies apart. And so once you can no longer compete on products or services because, they're fairly similar nowadays, it's really the customer experience. And through that, you need the behavioral understanding of how to appeal to that to really differentiate from, competitors.
Yeah, that's a great and very, very practical answer. Thank you so much for that. I think what I will be taking from this conversation is the last part of it, that the tools that have been maybe privileged before for the universities or academics now have been democratized, and basically everyone can at least explore how to leverage that science for the benefit of the customer, whether you are challenged with your expansion, growth, you're stuck, there are professionals out there who can help. Thank you so much, Nick and Matt.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks a ton. It's a ton of fun.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.